middle of 2008, and that was at the beginning of the recession. Anybody remember the recession of '08? That was the younger ones was like, I wasn't even born yet. That's okay. We won't hold it against you. So what happened, we got married right there at the beginning of the recession of 2008, and we were already planning for me to work part-time because I hadn't finished my degree yet. So the church was going to pay for me to go to school, and so I was going to go part-time at the school, but we were going to be okay because Liz was also going to work at the church, and she was going to work full-time. We thought this was a great place. This was my first ministry position. We had just moved out of our parents' houses. We were all excited about what was happening, and then the recession hit. And I don't know if y'all remember around that time, but it seemed like there was like some warning signs, but like I was 23 at the time, so 23, 24, so like I wasn't really paying attention to the stock market back then or housing market or anything like that. And so it seemed like overnight, just like finances changed. Everything changed. And at the church, what happened was the giving went down. Giving went way down. And my pastor had to make one of the hardest decisions he ever had to make in his life. He had to start laying people off. And Liz was one of them. So we went from one part-time income and one full-time income to we were doing okay. We lived in Clearwater, Florida. Clearwater, Florida is a very expensive place to live, but we were doing okay. And then all of a sudden we dropped down to one part-time income. I was bringing home $240 a week. And Clearwater, Florida, while it was a very expensive place, it was also one of the places that was hardest hit by the subprime mortgage crisis. That's what happened in '08. They were selling houses before the crisis. Condos there were going up, before they even opened, were going up in value by 30% about every year to 6 months. And then the bottom just fell out. And there were no jobs. And there was no money. And we were just stuck. Thankfully, the church provided a parsonage for us, and they paid for all of our utilities, including cable and internet. Otherwise, there is absolutely no way that we could have made all of the money work. But there was one thing that we did through that entire time, and that was tithe. We continued to trust God with our money every single step of the way. And so both of us grew up in Christian homes, and so we had been taught from a very early age to give 10% of our income away. I'll be honest that Liz was better at it than I was. I knew that I had to give 10%, but I rarely ever gave the first 10%. I would always be like, got my paycheck and be like, I got to bring cash this week, or where's my checkbook? I don't know. This is there was no Cash App back then. There was no give on the app. It's just Facebook was still in Harvard. It wasn't anywhere else. That was what you had to do. And so there was no way for us to give. And I would just it would be sometimes weeks or months. I'm like, God, I'm sorry. I didn't give this to you first, as I write my check to God. But we continued to trust him and continue to give that to God. Now, I know that giving 10% of your income seems counterintuitive, especially when you're living on ramen and chicken nuggets. Has anybody ever just been completely broke and you're just like, I'm just not sure how I can give that money away? But more than once, as we continue to give and we continue to trust in God, more than once, God provided for us. People just showed up and just gave us $100. There was one time, my school, I was talking to one of my counselors about what was going on, and I showed up. She called me into the office a couple days later, and she gave me a check for $1,000 and said, you earned this scholarship, here you go. And it was like every time that our bank account dropped down to where I'm not sure if we're going to be able to make ends meet, all of a sudden money just showed up, and God continued to take care of us. Now, talking about tithing and specifically about money in church can be awkward. Some of you already feel like, oh no, are we doing this today? Yes, yeah, we're doing this today. But mainly because the list of the pastors that have misused funds is a mile long. There's hurt and abuse there for money and people taking that, and I know that, and I've seen that list, and it's rough. So let me start here before we go any deeper, talking anything else about tithing tithing and money to that, is that what I'm talking about today is not about lining my pockets or buying golden sinks for the church. We're not going to do that, okay? And those of you who paid attention to the televangelists in the 80s, you know what I'm talking about, okay? We're not doing that, all right? But here's what I'm talking about, is that everything I talk today is not about what I can get from you. This is about what God can do for you, okay? This is not about me trying to make our offerings go up. This is not about trying to do all the tithes. And yeah, we're going to do the Projector Project offering at the end of service today. And it's not about that. All the giving that we're talking about today is about what God can do for you. Now, we're continuing our series of living like Jesus. We want to live out those disciplines that God has given us. The disciplines of we're asking the question, how do I not just look like Jesus, but how do I be like Jesus? And it's not about just like going to church and wearing the right clothes and saying the right things and do it, but it's actually like becoming who God created us to be. It's about us becoming who Jesus is. That's what it is, so that we can answer that question, what would Jesus do? Because sometimes Jesus doesn't answer the question. When you go through the Gospels, he doesn't talk about, should I give to the Projector Project or should I save it and give it to somebody else? I don't know. It's not specific in the Bible. So what should we do? Well, if we put these disciplines in our lives, if we put these disciplines, the same disciplines that Jesus had, if we put them in our lives, then we can actually answer that question of what can Jesus do? What did Jesus do? What was Jesus like? We can answer those questions because we are living like Jesus. And money is a huge part of our lives. It's what makes the world go round. Money is so important that it's actually one of the most important things. It's one of the biggest things that Jesus talked about in the New Testament. In the Gospels, he talked about money almost the most, which is why this discipline that we're going to talk about today, tithing and generosity. Tithing and generosity, this is the discipline that if we're going to be like Jesus, we need to do this just like all the other ones that we've done. Now, in our last series, we studied the Sermon on the Mount, and we read a verse about that Jesus talked about money. It was in Matthew chapter 6, verse 24. It said, "No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money." Because here's the thing, money can take over our lives. It can be our sole purpose. It can be our sole drive of everything that we do, and we actually end up putting money as an idol. We put money in front of God. But by giving, what we're doing is we're declaring that we serve God first. So that you can still have money and serve God at the same time. Because there's sometimes in Christianity where you believe it is just by that if you're going to be a Christian, then you have to take a vow of poverty and you shouldn't have nice things. That's not what following Jesus is about. Because if you're going to be generous, guess what you need to have to be generous? Money. You have to have those things. So to put God first, to say that money is not the master of my life, God is, I'm going to give to God first. We realize that money is just a tool, not something to be served. But just dropping a few bucks into that offering bucket is not practicing the discipline of tithing and generosity. That's not putting God first in our lives. Every time it passes by, you just drop 20 bucks or $5 or $1. That's not what it is. That's not what it means to practice that tithing and generosity. We do it. We practice this discipline by giving to God first. So in the Old Testament, God asked the Israelites to give a tenth of everything they make, not just any tenth. It says in Proverbs 3:9, he says, "Honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of all your crops." Now, when you read Proverbs, it's always important to look at it in context because so much of Proverbs is written in what's called couplets, where a lot of times they introduce a tension in the first one and then a conclusion in the second one. So that's what this one says. Honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of all your crops. So you give God first. Why? What for? That's where we go to the next verse. then your barns will be filled to overflowing, and your vats will brim over with new wine. Now, I don't have a barn or a vat. I'm not even sure what a vat is, but I'm pretty sure I don't have one, okay? I have a bin. That's not the same thing. So what he's talking about here is that if we give to God first, he's using an agricultural metaphor here. If we give to God first, then he will give to us. We will be taken care of. If we put God first in everything, especially in our money, we will be blessed. Now, I want to be very careful here when I say that you will be blessed, because prosperity gospel preachers have made a fortune off of saying that if you give God money, he will give you back God money. You sow a seed to get a seed, to grow a seed, that type thing. You have to say it like that. You breathe, you sow a seed to grow a seed. I'm like, yes, I'm going to give you my last $10. No, okay? When we talk about blessings is not just money and material. Okay? We can get money and material, but when we're talking about the different blessings of God, here are some things that we can give. God can give us peace that surpasses all understanding. That's a blessing. He can give us unconditional love, that no matter what you've done, no matter where you come from, no matter who you are, God still loves you. That's a blessing. Another one, he gives you compassion. He looks after you. He feels for you. God knows everything you're going through because Jesus came to earth, lived on earth as a man. He felt pain. He felt betrayal. He knows what you're going through because he lived it. So he gives us that blessing of compassion that, you're not just talking to somebody who has no idea what you're doing, because God knows. And then he gives you grace, that no matter what you've done, he will forgive you. All you have to do is repent. Go and ask for forgiveness, and he will give you. You don't deserve it. You don't have to earn it, and he gives it to you. That's another blessing. He gives you mercy. You don't deserve it, and he still forgives you. And most importantly, a blessing from God is our salvation. That we can be saved from our sins, that we can actually become more like Jesus, that grace and mercy is extended to us so that we can actually be saved. These are all blessings of God's, and there's many, many more of those. So can God bless us with money and material? Like get you that brand new house and that brand new car you've been praying for? Absolutely, he can do that. But is that all of it? No, it's not. God can bless us in other ways. So as we're trusting God, and it's like, God, I'm giving you this because I need you to do this for me. That's transactional, okay? Your relationship with God is not transactional. You do this, you get this in return. He's not a computer. He's not Santa Claus. That's not how it works. God's relationship, our relationship with God is just that, a relationship that we trust God, and so then he blesses us. Not exactly in return, but as just as much as I trust Liz to do things, Liz trusts me back. There's a mutual respect going on because it's a relationship between those two things. So what we have to do whenever you're giving to God, the very first thing you need to do, the first thing you got to do is that you have to give to God first. And by giving to God first, what we're saying is that God, I trust you. I give to you first. I have all these bills and all these obligations. There's so many people that are worried about the SNAP program is ending because of the government shutdown that's happening. And they're like, God, I'm just not sure if this is going to work out. It's like, you still got to trust God, and you still got to give it to him first. Because I have all these things. But what we're saying is that, God, you are the Lord of my life. You are in charge. And so by trusting you with this first, I trust that you will provide everything else. So now what we need to do is, so now we know we got to give God first, but what about the tithe? Where did this 10% come from? Now the word tithe literally means 10%. In the original Hebrew, in the original Greek, that's where that word tithe comes from. It means that 10%. And most of the verses about tithing are in the Old Testament. And when we talk about the Old Testament is an old covenant. It's an old agreement between God and the Israelites. And so some of those things we can carry over to us, but we have to look at what Jesus said to say, okay, what part of these rules come over to us and what don't, and what doesn't. Now, Jesus was not specific about his kingdom giving a tenth. Jesus never said, give God your tithe. Those words did not come out of his mouth, okay? He did talk about tithing. He did talk about money, but he never really talked about that. But here's what he did talk about. Jesus all the time talked about being generous. Look in Luke chapter 6, verse 38. He said, give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, will be poured into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. So a lot of people say, well, Jesus never talked about tithing, so I don't have to tithe. Is that what Jesus is saying here? He's saying, no, be generous. And if you're generous, and like think about a measuring cup. You take that measuring cup and you take that, press down, shake it together. You are smoothing out. You're packing in as much as you can into that, shaking together, and then running over, and that will be poured into your lap. God will richly bless you far more than what you can ever give, whatever you need to do. So what you have to do is we have to be generous first. If you want the world to be generous with you, you need to be generous first. You're all mad that people aren't taking care of you. You're all mad that people aren't looking out for you. You're all mad. You're annoyed. You're frustrated that people don't look out for you. You know what you got to do? You need to be generous first. Go first. Be that example. Be that person. This goes down to a lot of times that people complain about like my family never calls me. They never reach out to me. I'm just all alone, and I'm just sitting here just waiting for them to call. Well, you know what you can do? You have their phone number too. You can call them. It's allowed, okay? You can call them too. You have to be generous first. And so if you want God to be generous with you, if you want the world to be generous with you, you need to be generous first. And just as we give God first, we need to be generous with other people. We can be generous with our time, generous with our talent, generous with our resources. Because the fear so often is that if we give too much, we're going to run out. Anybody ever felt that before? I have every time I write that tithe check. Like, oof. But here's what I've learned from personal experience and stories from people all over the world who have been following Jesus all their lives, is that you can't outgive God. You cannot outgive God because God owns literally everything. And if he owns literally everything, he can provide for you. He can take care of you. We see this plainly in Mark chapter 6. So if you have your Bibles, you can open that up. That's where we're going to spend most of our time. But the biggest chunk of the verse that we're going to talk about today is Mark chapter 6, verse 32 through 44 is where we're going to go. Now, remember, when Jesus traveled, he always traveled with large crowds with him. Now, some of these people in these crowds, some of these people were his disciples. He had the 12 guys that we read about, Matthew and James and Peter and John and Bartholomew and Thomas, all those guys. But it wasn't just those 12. He had other people with him, like Mary Magdalene was with him and Joanna and all these other people. There was hundreds of people that followed him. And so some of them were his disciples. Some were there just for the spectacle of the miracles. They just wanted to see Jesus do awesome things. Others there were there for healing because they wanted something from Jesus. And others were there just to catch him and just to criticize him and just to call him out for sinning or try to catch him in doing something so they could shut him down. And everywhere Jesus went, they followed him, even following Jesus when he wanted to get away. And that's where we pick up in verse 32. It says, so they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. So Jesus is trying to get away from all the people. He's trying to get some alone time. Remember, we talked about silence and solitude a couple weeks ago. This is Jesus trying to go to a solitary place. He says, but many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. They're heading across the Sea of Galilee, and instead of them crossing the Sea of Galilee, they just ran around the perimeter so they could get there before Jesus did. Verse 34, when Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. By this time, it was late in the day, so his disciples came to him. And they said, this is a remote place, they said. It's already very late. Send the people away so they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy them something to eat. Now, this is a practical concern. Whenever you have a group of people together and it's over a mealtime, what are you supposed to do? Feed them. It's just the nice and proper thing to do. If you're leading something and you're meeting over mealtime, you got to feed them. And so they're like, hey, we got to feed them. Like, let's send them out because we didn't come prepared for that. We didn't run an offering. We didn't do a sign up on Planning Center on Church Center app for everybody to like bring food. That didn't happen. So like, we got to feed these people. What are we going to do? And so Jesus turns to them and he says, send the people away and go to, we already read that. He said, but he answered them, you give them something to eat. They said to him, that would take more than half a year's wages. Are we to go and spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat? Jesus says, how many loaves do you have? He asked. Go and see. And so the disciples went and they started looking around. It's like, you got bread? You got bread? You got anything? And they probably even went into the crowd and tried to, like, who's got lunch? Anybody got anything? And they found probably one kid who actually planned ahead. And they said, then Jesus, while they're doing this, Jesus directed them to all the people to sit down in groups of green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and fifties. And taking the 5 loaves, they found 5 loaves and 2 fish. And looking up to heaven, Jesus gave thanks and he broke the loaves. Then he gave them to the disciples and distributed to the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them all. So the disciples there are holding 5 loaves and 2 fish and staring at what we find out to be about 5,000 men. And like, how is this going to work? And so they just give like a little tidbit. You know how like when you get that brown bread at the restaurant and you don't want to eat all of it, so you just take that little bit off of it, and then you take a little bit more, and a little bit more because it's good, and you just want to keep eating. And so they're like, that's what the disciples are doing. They're just kind of give a little bit of bread. But then they find out, like, wait, this is multiplying. This is getting more. This is getting more. Verse 42 says, they all ate and were satisfied. And the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces of bread and fish. The number of the men who had eaten was 5,000. Now, scholars say there's more than that. Because there's 5,000 men, there were also women and children there too. So some scholars believe that there was 12 to 15,000 people ate off 5 loaves and 2 fish, and they ate their full, and there was leftovers. They were generous first, and Jesus did a miracle. Jesus gave more than half a year's wages worth of food plus leftovers. He took care of them, and he provided for them because he had compassion on them. And all they started with was 5 loaves and 2 fishes. So what we need to do is we need to trust God with what you have and be generous with what's left, because you never know what God is going to do. So let's get practical here. How do we actually give? How do we make sure that we give? Does it actually have to be 10%? What if you can't afford 10%? What's the difference between a tithe and an offering? So let's talk about these things. Let's talk about these practical things that we need when we talk about this. Now, the key to start giving to God, to trusting God with your money, is to just start somewhere. So even though Jesus never commanded us to give 10%, I do think that that's a good goal. Because if we look back at what the Old Testament said, specifically in Malachi 3:10, God says through the prophet Malachi, he said, bring the whole tithe into the storehouse that there may be food in my house. Test me in this, says the Lord Almighty, and see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing that there will not be room enough to store it. So this is about the only time that God ever says, test me. So shoot for 10%. Bring the whole tithe in there. Go ahead and do that and test God in it and see if he won't throw open the floodgates. See if God will not bless you because you are giving and giving to him, and he will give you so much that there won't even be room enough to store it. So if you just can't do 10%, 10% just seems like we just can't get that much, then give 1 or 2 or 3%. Start somewhere. But then also make a plan to keep raising your tithe. Like, if you're making $100 a week, you can give $1, you can give $2, maybe even $3. $10 might be pushing it. But then you're also making a plan of saying, okay, I'm going to give God just a little bit more. And so what you do is you meet and you look at your budget. You can do it, you reevaluate your budget. Do it once a month, do it once a quarter, do it once a year, and say, okay, I think we can do a little bit more. I think we can trust God with just this 10%, and so we can actually get up to that 10%. Because what happens is as you gradually build up, you start missing that money less because it's already gone out first. You never even saw it. It just goes out first, and then God starts blessing you, and you start taking care of it, and all of a sudden it feels like your money starts stretching out. So what we have to do is we have to give to God first. Now, since I'm salaried, that's the way I work. Every 2 weeks, I get a paycheck that pops in there. What I do for me to make sure that I give to God first is that I actually automate how I give my tithe. That's why, like, when you see the tithe come in, you never see me drop anything in the bucket, because I went onto my bank and I told it, give this much to the church and give this much to the other places. So it automatically comes out of my bank account and puts it in there. You can do that too with your bank. You can go to Church Center app, and you can set it up to automate. When you look at the drop down, the second drop down says one time or it says recurring. You can set up recurring giving, and you can give that way, and it just makes it so much easier. So that way, if you miss a Sunday because you're sick or you're on vacation or something, it still goes, it automatically comes out. Or you forget your checkbook or you don't have the cash. You can just okay, I know that I can give to God this way. And by me doing that, I don't have to worry about anything. Now, those of us who are hourly, I used to work an hourly job. It was a little bit more complicated because I didn't know exactly how much money I was going to get paid. When my paycheck came in, one of the first things I did that morning is I would sit down and I would do the math and figure out exactly what it was, and I would send off the checks and trust God for what's there. And because I always wanted to make sure that I gave to God first, set on that percentage that Liz and I had decided. Now, once you've hit that 10%, you're good to go. You don't have to give anything else. You can stop there because you've satisfied what God has asked you to do. But sometimes you can give more. And when you give above that 10%, that's what we call an offering. That's why when we say we're going to do our tithes and offering, the tithes is that first 10%, and the offering is everything that you give above that. So just to go through some definitions, first, the tithe is the first 10% of your income. This is how much we've decided to give to God first. It's that first 10%. And then your offering is anything you give beyond that 10%. And when you give beyond that 10%, you can give that to whatever you want. You can give to missions. You can give to the Projector Project we talked about earlier. You can give to a charity organization that you believe in. So Liz and I, we decided that we're going to give 10%, but we also support missionaries, Justin and Anna Gilpin. Our church supports them as missionaries as well, but Liz and I have supported them mainly because I've known Anna since she was born. She and my sister were best friends growing up, so I'm going to support them. We also support a sex trafficking organization that stops sex trafficking in Moldova. We helped that organization, and we said, okay, we're going to give a certain percentage to them and go support them. It doesn't really matter what you give to as long as you give something. That's what the offering. You can choose, give to something that pulls on your heartstrings. And so what you need to do is you need to decide what kind of giver do you want to be. Now, most people are what's called a lump sum giver. That's the one where you just drop the offering bucket, or you hear a big need and you just drop a certain amount in there. And so when you get your contribution statement at the end of the year, you are surprised. It's like, wow, we gave that much? I had no idea. That's a lump sum giver. You're just like, okay, this is how much is going to give there. But the other version is a percentage giver, that you have decided this is how much you're going to give. And that's what Liz and I have decided. We have decided we're going to give a particular percentage to God, and that's how much we give. So when we get our contribution statement, we're not surprised at how much money is there, because that's what we decided at the beginning of the year, how much we were going to give. Now, we do sometimes give a lump sum, things that we hadn't planned on at the beginning of the year. We do that, but for the most part, we have a plan and say, okay, this is the percentage that I am going to give. So, how do we put all this into practice? How do we actually make all of this happen? The first thing you need to do is you need to schedule a financial meeting. These are real fun to have. Everybody loves these, okay? Have a schedule a financial meeting. Now, if you're married, set this up with your spouse. Do not do this alone, okay? You are one house, you're one body, you're one place. That needs to be a decision that all of you make, that both of you make together. This is what we're choosing to do. And if you have older children, like you need to bring them in on this thing that's like, hey, we're choosing. That way you can teach them to have that. Caleb, this weekend, he went and he was at the Harvest Festival, and he sold a special drink called Fruitnade, and he made like $100, something like that off of it. And so even at 10, we're teaching him, it's like, hey, you got to take some of that money and you got to give it to God. You got to trust God for it. And he's like, because he wants to buy a Switch 2 with that money. And it's like, I got to go back and make more money now? I was almost there. And it's like, you got to trust God. You got to give it to him first. So schedule a financial meeting. If you're single, guess who you get to meet with? Yourself. So much easier, okay? All right? Yeah, if I didn't have to convince Liz to do stuff, I could get a whole lot of things done. Usually it's the other way around, but anyway. So you schedule a financial meeting. So what are you doing? What are you talking about in this meeting? Well, first thing you're going to do is you need to calculate your tithe percentage, okay? I know some of us don't like math, all right, but this is super easy. So if you're going to do 10%, multiply by 0.1. You figure out how much money you make. And if you want to talk about gross or net, I can talk about that personally, but we can talk about that. But what you do is you take however much money you make and you multiply that by 0.1, and that's how much you give. That easy. If you're going to give like 1% or 5% or something, then you're going to give like 0.01 or 0.05. Do that little math, and that tells you, okay, this is how much we are going to give. And I'm going to tell you, like, I have been tithing most of my life. But there were times when, like, I was hourly, like even last year, I was tithing off like what I made from the church and what I made from the school and what I made off of my blog business, and I was writing those checks, and there was a check in my spirit like, oh, can I trust God with this? And I was like, I've already made the decision. And I didn't trust, but I didn't feel like I wanted to trust. I was like, I'm going to trust God, and I hit go. And I wrote that check, and I did that thing. I trusted God for it. So first thing, calculate your tithe percentage. Second thing, make a plan to give it first. This is what we talked about earlier, okay? So automate it with your bank. Go into the Planning Center, the Church Center app, and give there. How are you actually going to make sure that you give to God first? Because that's what needs to happen. Because if you wait for God, if you wait till you're at the end of the month, what's going to happen? You're going to be out of money. Okay, so if you give to God first at the beginning of your pay period, you have all the money. It's like, hey, we can go out to eat because we got all this money. Well, you can also trust God. And then you might have money at the end to go out to eat and do those things that you love to do. So second thing, make a plan to give it first. Third thing, dream about what you can do with your money. Because God may have given you the gift of generosity. And God may have blessed you. God may have blessed you with so much that you can go and be generous with other people. Or maybe he hasn't blessed you with anything, but you still feel like you can be generous with other people. You can still give to other people. Because here's what we know, is that you may never know what God can do. You may never know how God can take care of you. We've talked about my back and all the issues that I've had with it so far. And I can tell you that this is a very expensive injury that I've had. Go and get MRIs and outpatient surgery for them to deal with my back, and it's still not fixed. But I continue to trust God with that. And you know what happened about a month ago? We had 3 weekends where we just had a check, unexpected check of $1,000 or more, just show up at our house. We didn't expect it. And God was just generous with us. He was taking care of us because I'm trying to be as generous I can with y'all. I'm trying to be as generous I can with my money. I'm trusting God. And he's blessed us, and he's continuing to bless us. You never know what God can do. So if you can trust God, if you can trust God with your money, if you can put God first and trust that he will take care of everything else, you never know what he's going to do. Because you can't outgive God. So what we're going to do, we've talked about tithing and generosity. What we're going to do now is we're going to take up an offering. So I'm going to invite our ushers to stand up and come on up to the front. And I'm going to ask you to put this into practice. And like I said,